Iggy and the Stooges Raw Power Legacy Remastered Crap Edition.
Hi, my needle drops. Anthony Fantano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, doing an album review of this new remastered legacy edition of Iggy and the Stooges Raw Power. This LP was released in 1973 and was the Stooges' last album, and I do say last album because in my world, the weirdness does not exist. But whether you realize it or not, the Stooges are one of the greatest bands in rock music, and this LP is one of their toughest pieces of work. If you're a fan of punk, hard rock, or metal, Raw Power is definitely something that you need to be appreciating. I know that there are bands that have released, very hard, dark albums before this LP. For example, the self-titled Black Sabbath album. But still, Raw Power is the literal hardening of music, a foretelling of the sounds that would be coming out of the punk movement in the late 70s. And even by today's standards, this LP is seriously ballsy. A few bands will go to the lengths that the Stooges did on Raw Power. You want to talk guts, they almost disembowel themselves on every track. The problem, the issue with this album is that it has suffered numerous mixing problems. It's like Raw Power is almost cursed. Like it's just destined to spend the rest of eternity wallowing in various forms of crappy sounds. Originally, the album was recorded and produced by Stooges frontman Iggy Pop, but after hearing it, the label Legacy forced a remix, sent David Bowie in there to do damage control. But the thing is, it doesn't matter how great of a producer you are, David Bowie only had one day to mix it, and that was kind of well documented. Now, of course, the limited mixing time resulted in a garbage sound that did the band no justice and led to very poor album sales for Raw Power. The Stooges' previous album sounded much better, but still, the ideas, the concepts, the raw driving energy of this album was still there. And of course that gained it the cult following that would make it influence music for years to come. Now eventually Raw Power was re-released on CD in the 80s, and like most CD re-releases that came out in the 80s, the resulting sound was not pretty. In 97, Legacy looked into remixing the album, inviting Iggy Pop to do the remix, telling him that whether he was in on the project or not, this remix was going to happen, so he might as well take part in it. And the result of that 97 remix is quite possibly one of the loudest, most assaulting albums in rock music. This thing is freaking punishing after Iggy Pop put it together. The 97 version is unbelievably compressed. I had no clue they could put that much compression on music in the 90s. With the amount of bleed the compression gives to this remix of the album, it's almost as if Iggy Pop ran each individual instrument through a grinder and then mixed it all together and then put it in, some intestines. It's basically like musical sausage. One instrument's just bleeding into the other instrument. It's kind of hard to pull apart, but when it's all together, which is just, how it should be, it's such a mind. And a lot of people got down on that 97 remix. There's some really clear distortion, and even Stooges members James Williamson and Ron Ashton had come out publicly saying, yeah, we like the Bowie mix better. But if we look at a little side release that came out in 95 titled Rough Power, this LP is a set of the original pre-Bowie mixes of Raw Power, and the thing is, the thick, bassy sound of the new Iggy Pop mix is totally there. It's a little messier than Bowie's mix in terms of production and editing and just the sound of the instruments. There's a little bit of hiss, a little bit of noise in some of the tracks, but still, I have to respect this 97 mix because to me, it seems like that was what was originally intended for the album to sound like. If you look at the original mixes on that Rough Power, that remix may not be perfect, but there's a lot more balance in the instruments, it's a lot less trebly, and to me, a lot more of an assault and a better representation of what the Stooges wanted to be or were supposed to be. This new Legacy Edition, like I said, is just a re-release of the original Bowie mixes with a bit of remastering, and that has made these songs sound much more pleasurable, I guess you could say. But still, the flaws and the bad mixing are still there. The bass and the drums are pretty much gone. For me, the first 3 tracks on this album, with the Bowie mix, completely ruined. Search and Destroy is one of the most badass opening tracks of all time, and one of the most badass rock songs of all time. But this version, God, just no drums. No bass. The leads are 3 times louder than anything else going on in the song, to the point where it's painful to listen to. The drums kick up a little bit more on the track Penetration, but not by much. In fact, throughout this entire Bowie mix, the drums never really get the attention or the respect that they deserve. Pretty much the entire time, Iggy's vocals and the lead guitar take turns being too loud to tolerate. I realize the historical significance of putting out this album and maybe not letting the Bowie mixes completely go into obscurity to the point where people can't get a hold of them. But still, because this thing is getting reissued, I'm more concerned about it creating buzz, creating some questions about who the Stooges are. I know there are a lot of younger viewers in my audience, and I'm more worried about them getting introduced to the Stooges properly because they're such a great band. And the thing is, if as a result of this reissue coming out, you're kind of wondering, you're hearing about them, you don't know who they are, you're wondering if you should pick up this LP, I highly advocate checking out the Stooges, but still I recommend Iggy's 97 remix much more than this new kind of deluxe reissue. There are some cool live recordings on this release too, but it seems to me like it's more of a piece of history as opposed to some kind of remastered, remixed, reissued, definitive edition that everyone can go to get the real, badass, intended feel of what Raw Power is. For me, even though it's not perfect, that badass version is still the 97 Iggy remix. This thing is just kind of something that you may pick up if you're curious as to what the Bowie mixes were, if you're really obsessed with the Stooges and you're kind of a collector of things that are related to the band, or if you're one of those people, and I know that there are quite a few of you who really do hate that Iggy mix. Of course, no matter what mix you're listening to, the greatness of all the songs on Raw Power is going to shine through. The raw intensity, the energy, just the overall feel is going to shine through today, just like it did in 1973. However, I feel like it's easier to get this album when you either listen to the Rough Power version or the 97 Iggy remix, not the Bowie mix. So Raw Power, the concept, the idea, the songs, to me, get a Mofo 10. They get a Mofo 10. Okay? But the thing is, this version, this Bowie mix and this reissue is kind of a light 5 for me. Obviously, all my qualms are with the mixing and whether or not I feel like the sound of that is representational of the band. I don't happen to think that this version is. Grab the Iggy version, grab that Rough Power version. They're pretty cheap on the internet, and do get into Iggy and the Stooges, one of the best bands in rock and roll, and one of the reasons rock music is as hard as it is today. Anthony Fantano, Iggy and the Stooges, Raw Power.